In 1709, Jacques de Vaucanson, one of the greatest creators of automata and mechanical innovations, was born. Raised in poverty, he showed a natural aptitude for clockwork at a very young age. His abilities continued to develop, and he became a forward-thinking man with creations that were unheard of at the time. Eventually becoming part of a religious order, he made automata that could serve food and take away plates. Unfortunately, these early works were lost forever when his fellow monks declared the work profane and ordered the destruction of Vaucanson's workshop. It was at this point that he fled to Paris and studied anatomy. These studies eventually led him to creating the three automatons that are considered his most important inventions, both at the time of their creation and in today's society: the flute player, the pipe player, and the duck. Each of these worked just as the real flesh and blood version would, playing music and doing whatever it is that a duck does. What is important to understand is the complexity of these creations. The flute is the hardest wind instrument to learn because it requires control of fingers, lips, tongue, and airflow. Vaucanson was able to create all of the parts in such a way that they nearly perfectly mimicked the human anatomy. The duck continues to be his most well-known creation. It walked, flapped, swam, quacked, ate, and, keeping with his intention to perfectly imitate life, defecated. But why would someone create such incredible machines? Why create a mechanical flautist? Why build a pooping duck? The answer lies in the culture of the 18th century Enlightenment. But really, why? The Enlightenment was the title given to the 18th century, and it was defined as a period of diminishing spirituality, a rise in the importance of logic, and a questioning of what it meant to be human. These imitations of living things, as created by Vaucanson, fit perfectly into these ideals. He sought to pull back the curtain and reveal the mysticism of life. Vaucanson said his duck was made completely see-through because, "My design is rather to demonstrate the manner of the actions than to show a machine." Many at the time would think of machines as having some sort of spiritual essence, but this was showing that there was nothing special about the series of gears and springs inside his creation. The flute player was also a part of Enlightenment-driven scientific pursuits. He published a pamphlet that went into incredible detail about every single process and how the human body was replicated. His highly detailed automaton allowed people to gain insight into how their bodies worked. Such inventions were scientifically and philosophically significant, and were very indicative of the times he lived in, and while they were incredibly advanced and acted as a sort of preview for things to come centuries later, it wasn't until he was commissioned by the king to improve France's silk industry that his work could definitely be said to be ahead of its time. Vaucanson was appointed Royal Inspector of Silk Manufacture, and used his knowledge to create an advanced mechanical loom that would spin silk to a higher quality at a greater speed while requiring only one operator instead of two. It was even programmable to a degree, with the incredible innovation of using interchangeable punch cards made of wood. Although this attempt at industrialization was met with failure due to backlash from the workers, the fact that this device existed at all is a testament to his genius and forward thinking. This all took place from 1741 to 1744, which is well ahead of the French Industrial Revolution, and England's industry did not become significant until later in the century. Most interesting about all of his invention, innovation, and thought is how relevant it became only later in time. The things he created and the questions he tackled are only becoming more important and relevant as our technology becomes increasingly complex. In regard to his flute player, he was questioning what a human really was. He clearly understood that interlocking mechanical processes drove the flute player's actions, and it played exactly as a human could. Today our machines are only getting more complex. Artificial intelligences and humanoid robots are raising the same questions today as his flautist did during the Enlightenment. The real proof that this was a man thinking ahead of his time is the simple fact that this silk spinner was redesigned 50 years later and became the famous Jacques loom. This was at a time when England's economy had exploded with the advent of industrial manufacturing technology, and France realized that it needed to keep up to remain competitive in the global economy. Significantly, punch cards became the basis of early computing and programming. Even as early as 1850, Charles Babbage planned to use punch cards for his difference engine. While the design was not likely to have been taken from Vaucanson, the fact is that he understood the need for interchangeable programs and predicted the medium for this information transfer. What did this man see for the future? His writings and notes are mostly technical and explanatory, so he never directly states an intent or vision of the future, but his work has a number of indicative trends that suggest a sort of end goal to his work, namely, the intent to use machines to replicate human action. What is telling is that one of his first alleged achievements was robots that could do basic household tasks. They were designed to do exactly what a human could do, and his later automata were expressly designed to imitate the human form as closely as possible. He was building mechanical substitutes for human action. His ultimate goal was the realization of this idea, and it is easily the most futuristic of his works, science fiction even. He tried to create a fully human machine that could breathe, digest, move, and have flowing blood. This machine was called the Bleeding Man. He wished to advance from automata to a true, thinking android. Though precious little is known about this robot, we can see that he was pressing the technology of his time to the limit. He struggled with creating veins small enough, so he was encouraged when France discovered a new kind of elastic rubber in the Amazon. He knew he could make the veins he needed, and maybe even create cords to allow his creation to speak. This was a man who truly reached into the future. He created some of the first androids, and the first, and probably last, pooping duckbot. His more practical invention of the loom was revisited 50 years later, and his punch cards showed an insight into an industry that would not even be considered for another 100 years.